thank you all for coming, and thank you, Brendan, for having us. This panel is called Urban Defibrillator, How to Revive a City, which I think is probably the hardest to pronounce panel of the day. My name is John Geraci. I'll introduce myself quickly, and then I'll ask everybody to introduce themselves. I am an entrepreneur from Brooklyn. I co-founded a website Outside In, and as I was doing that, I started another site called DIY City, the Do-It-Yourself City. And it wasn't a startup at all. It wasn't there was no money-making idea behind it, but I just was looking around Brooklyn thinking, God, the web works so well, and Brooklyn, by comparison, works so badly. How could we use all of these ideas that are going around the web to make our city work a little better? And so I launched this site, DIY City, about using technology to make cities work better without the consent or cooperation necessarily of the city. The site took off, became a hub of conversation around the world on how to do that. And that's the hat that I'm wearing to speak to you guys today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Chu, and I am a designer, an architectural designer, as well as a user experience designer. I wear many hats as well. My past experience has been in design journalism. I was working for Dwell magazine for a while as a contributor, and my background is in architecture and comparative media studies from MIT. Currently, I work at Continuum, which is a design and innovation consulting firm in Boston, and I work as a digital strategist there. So it's a little bit about me.
Good afternoon. I'm Don Sanders. I'm the Executive Artistic Director of MIFA Victory Theater. MIFA stands for Massachusetts International Festival of the Arts, and the Victory Theater is a 600-seat Broadway-style theater that's sitting right here in Holyoke, and we are working on its restoration and reopening. My career goes back 43 years as a director and producer in theater and music. I worked with the late Joseph Papp on 8 productions. And it's a very historic moment today. This is such a great thing, Thought Mill, and we are also interviewing the 6 finalists for the architects for the Victory Theater, who include the architects who did Radio City Music Hall, the renovation that is, Grand Central, the Apollo Theater, Trinity, the new Trinity Theater in Providence. So some pretty wonderful people see the value of Holyoke and what we're talking about, which is the bringing back, and not even the revitalization, the continued vitalization of a great place to live, which is a city.
Great. It's a little chilly. I don't know if they can turn off the air, but I'm Barbara Fields, and first of all, I'm very honored to be here with this group because it is a little bit outside my normal day-to-day work. Next week, I will be tenured at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development for 6 months, so I'm new at that job. It's an Obama appointment. I am the regional administrator for the 6 states in New England. Prior to that, I was for 20 years the executive director in Rhode Island for a national community development organization called LISC, Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is involved in raising private and public money and investing in rebuilding low-income communities. And my work there really started with affordable housing, but spanned all of the different things that communities need to grow and thrive, everything from child care facilities to working with the schools to working with the arts and healthcare centers. So all the different things that it takes for communities to thrive and grow and prosper.
So I was speaking with Brendan before the panel, and I said, Urban Defibrillator, what do you want this talk to be about, and what do you want people to come away with? And he said, well, there's legions of theory written about how to revive cities from an urban planning standpoint. What I want this panel to be about is how to do it from the grassroots standpoint and how the people can get involved. So I thought that would be a good conversation starter is what role of city revitalization should be played by the grassroots and the people as opposed to by the city or by a big company like Cisco. And Barbara, you want to lead off with thoughts on that?
Sure, jump right in. I mean, some of the best examples of cities that are really doing well in New England, outside of my own city of Providence, I think many of you have probably been to Lowell, Massachusetts, and there are great efforts underway in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And both of those communities actually credit their work to both the government-led effort but civic engagement, and that technology tools are very helpful, whether it's Google Map or Facebook, in trying to reach out and engage with residents. So I think that technology is a tool. It isn't the answer, it isn't the panacea, but it is probably one of the top 3 tools in our toolkits for reaching out and engaging residents. Because in my experience, in the old days, community organizing, something that we couldn't say before we had President Obama in office, we would always go around and raise money and not say those words and stuff. Where the old style community organizing was hold some meetings and see who shows up. And that you basically get the squeaky wheel. Or else you go out and door knock, and that depends on who's home, or who's willing to open their door to you. But sort of a more active engagement using technology and outreach, and more intentionally and structured engagement forums in which technology can be a huge tool and a huge asset, I think really speak to the future and ways to sustain an ongoing dialogue between those who perhaps have some of the resources and the money in government and planning departments, and those who it's going to affect and who should be included.
Anybody?
Come on, you guys jump in.
You don't have to jump in. I don't want people to feel like they have to jump in if they want. But if you,
I'm going to add on to that. So I think your comment about having the right tools in the toolkit is very fascinating. I think one of the, I guess, more underappreciated tools in urban planning, and that have recently come to the surface, is this tool of mapping and critical cartography. And I think recently it's become a lot more popular because of this thing we call the internet. And I think it's very, very pivotal in community organizing because of the accessibility of maps and the readability and legibility of maps. And I think that can be manifested in so many different ways. It could be paper maps, it could be storytelling maps, narrative maps, it could be online digital maps. And I'm going to cite, I think, one of my favorite examples of a community, like grassroots participation form of mapping is the Tenderloin Maps project in San Francisco, which is, I think, one of the most crime-ridden areas of that city. And what they did was they brought the community together and gave everyone a red Sharpie and a paper map of their neighborhood and told them to draw their favorite places. And that, I think, was a really pivotal example of people coming together and putting, their hearts and souls onto this little piece of paper that they could eventually digitize and share with everyone. So that's one of my personal favorite examples of recent kind of technologies helping the community organization process.
So I agree. I think that, to put it broadly, I feel like the government and big corporations can sort of create a platform for civic revitalization, but it's really the people and the grassroots that have to add on to that platform. And like government can build highways, but only the people can drive down the highways and make that happen. And a urban planning idea by itself is just kind of a press release without people showing up and doing the work. Barbara, I thought it was interesting. You talk about the old days and how the only way to do it was to have a meeting and the squeaky wheel would show up. I still feel personally that like one of the most effective tools, although Facebook and technology, social networking is great for reaching out, but one of the most effective tools is getting people together. And I of course remember town hall meetings from where I grew up north of San Francisco being squeaky wheel meetings, but I contrast that with New York City, where I live now, and these meetups that people have that are, like, to me, just really an integral part to what makes the New York tech scene work is these meetups of people that are like-minded people that are really not squeaky wheels. I mean, I guess there are squeaky wheels that show up there. There's always every crowd, but they're really focused and driven, and they have a mission to do something.
Can I ask, what do you think it is about meetups that make people want to attend them in the first place? I mean,
Yeah,
it could
it's a
just
good
be
question.
any party in any building. What makes
a meetup the focal?
Good question. I think that there's sort of a birds of a feather, sort of a like attracts like element to it. That, you know, if you just have a town hall meeting, then you get the people who have a grievance and saying, you know, why is my neighbor playing his music so loud till 3 in the morning? But if you have a meetup that's saying, all tech entrepreneurs, come, let's talk about ways that we can make the tech entrepreneur scene take off more. It sort of has a filtering effect to keep people who aren't interested in that away, and it also builds on itself and builds something. So, what do you guys think as far as grassroots layering itself on top of that government platform or the big corporate platform? What are some tactics that you've seen work in cities like Holyoke?
Well, I think for me, grassroots, the dynamic between grassroots and government is the most important dynamic that we have, actually, for anything in this country. Certainly, it's the most important dynamic for when something needs to improve, or when there is an asset or something that's being underutilized in a community that certain people recognize as being underutilized. You know, the old joke that Jonathan Winters told, you could read the Gideon Bible just so long and then you have to go downstairs. I mean, you can meet among ourselves, and you know, work on that and get you know, worked up, and that's great. But eventually, that has got to be translated to whatever the governmental structure is in the city, whatever the structure is, whether it is, at first, I believe, does begin with the political system in the city and or in the town, and through that, it then impacts the corporate and the individual people in the town, because the government of the town or city is the elected. They are the people who are looking after us, and so grassroots must always find a way to speak to whatever the administrative political system is. And I've rarely, except in a very few instances, seen that appeal not work. And I think that once that takes place, people have to recognize that what their feelings are or what they think should happen in their city or town, they lose energy if it isn't responded to by the people who can actually guide the project to sources of money, sources of other enthusiasm, sources of expertise that we might not have within the community. So I don't think there is any actual capability of revitalizing a community unless that dynamic exists. I mean, I just don't think it can happen. There can be a lot of interesting things and a lot of interesting meetings, but unless the group makes the step to actually see itself as empowered, it's not really probably going to be effective.
So any revitalization is a dialogue between the government, the local government, and the local people,
Yes.
You think?
I think so.
And what happens when you have one or the other? If you just have, I mean, I guess
a one-way street, just a one conversation, or no? You mean if there isn't a dialogue?
Yeah.
I think you get stalemate. I think you get disappointment on the part of the grassroots of us who see something that needs to be done, and I think you get, as far as the political structure, it just moves on to whatever does capture its attention, because it will move on to whatever captures its attention, and it will do its thing. It's always going to be there. So, but I do think unless the two things mesh, it is a stalemate.
So let's talk about like breakout successes in everybody's mind, and what like singular event in a city, or for me, I think more in terms of neighborhoods, because being from Brooklyn, you know, there are neighborhoods that are really doing well, there are neighborhoods that are struggling, and they're all kind of competing to be the neighborhood that's doing well. What do you see as like breakout successes on the East Coast, the Northeast, or in neighborhoods, or?
Well, I could jump in with something very quick. which is that back in 1968-69, when the New York Shakespeare Festival was first started in Astor Place, most people here are much too young to remember what Astor Place looked like then. And the theater was undergoing renovation, and Joe Papp said, we need to find rehearsal space while the theater is being renovated. And so I had known Jonas Mekas at the Cinematheque and knew that he had moved into this building on Worcester Street. So I went down to Jonas and I said, what is now Soho on Worcester Street was an absolutely empty, virtually abandoned light manufacturing area where there were, each floor of each building, people made things like paper clips or little novelty items and so forth, and that was all going out of business or they were moving away. And when we said, okay, well, let's take a lease on a space like John's wonderful space here and have people go down there and rehearse, et cetera. It was one subway stop. And it was the desire of people to need more space. I mean, in addition to the visual artists who had already been there, that created the entire dynamic that we now see as Soho. Now, what Soho has become, has translated to Brooklyn and to Williamsburg, and because that's now a shopping district, there's very little rehearsal being able to be done there, or that's on one hand a bad thing. On another hand, it does actually push the energy into other districts of the city or the community where that also takes place. So I do think that that's a very key. I think the fact that, taking a city like New York, and that so many people between the age of 24 and 42 want to live in an urban environment is we also want to get away to a rural environment, but it also shows that there's a deeper dynamic to a city like Holyoke. It's great to be able to walk out your door and shop. It's great to have a little restaurant. It's great to get your dry cleaning and not having to go to a car and drive to a shopping mall, et cetera. And I think people rediscover that, and I think wherever that's happening, and it is happening, it reflects the way we want to live. And I think that...
I think it's hard because New York isn't a universe.
Yeah, I know,
so
yeah.
We're going to look at the New York
Well,
example and put it
Providence,
aside.
yeah.
But I'll talk from my experience in Providence, and there's a neighborhood there. I know there's a couple of Providence people here in the crowd. But Olneyville is a neighborhood where we focused on in my former life. And basically, we had a very structured community civic engagement process, which wasn't about bringing people out just to hear their complaints, but to set an agenda. Every community, every neighborhood, people have issues. And you can come up with a laundry list of what Holyoke needs, and you would have 200 things. But we focused on having a community organizer reach out to people over a course of a 2 or 3 year period. I really believe in complexity theory. So a neighborhood is a living, growing, thriving organism in which there are so many different elements. And the question is, how do you align those? And how do you listen to those? And it is a lot about building relationships. And relationships take time and energy and commitment. And over the course of 3 years, in building these relationships, we started with just an 8 or 10 month engagement process. Nobody wants to sit around and plan for 3 years. They're frustrated. But we did what you said. We had some low-hanging fruit and got some early projects done. But the community set its priorities. They said, among our whole laundry list, these are the things that we want to do. And we put together what we call a community contract. Because I'm a planner, but don't call me that. You put a plan on a shelf and it sits there and it gathers dust. It's really lovely and you can pull it out historically. But a contract, we all know what that means. You have to do something, I have to do something. Nothing got in that contract in which some organization didn't agree, or a set of individuals, to try and run that idea downfield. It didn't mean the idea got done, but it meant they were going to be held accountable, and that there were a whole set of people who were going to try and get the resources to make those things happen. So whether someone said, we need a new youth center for our young people, or we need to revitalize the park, or build housing, or get some jobs here, someone was going to try and do that. Otherwise, it's just a great idea that sits there. So Olneyville is a community that is under 10,000 people. The average income, it's sort of like Holyoke, the average income is not only below statewide average, it's below city average. Large Latino community. So we did a lot of this, and we did bilingual translations. It took a lot of time, a lot of energy. But we had the alignment with the former mayor that's carried over to the new mayor in Providence, in which they would try and direct some resources there. And what you have growing in this part of Providence is a mixed income, mixed use community where we have some high-end housing, we have affordable housing, we have a park that was revitalized, we have public housing, and actually I missed last night the opening of a brand new New York style, it's called FET. It's a bar and a place to go right in the middle of this neighborhood that also has the greatest barbecue shop around. But I'll give you one example on a personal level. I mean, here we are in Holyoke. There's a lot of public housing in Holyoke. We have this across the city of Providence, and in Olneyville, no one would go to that public housing. I'm not going to walk over there. It was an island unto itself. But we slowly build relationships between public housing, community residents, and the police. We happen to have a police department you want to work with. That doesn't exist everywhere. So all of a sudden now, after building relationships, it doesn't happen overnight, but 2 or 3 years of trust, kids in the neighborhood actually go to activities at the Public Housing Authority where they never would have set foot before. Neighborhood kids go into the community. There's this great park that got built with a 3-mile bike trail, which really helps, where we took a lot of dead bodies out of the river. Yeah, that's Providence, let's remember. And we built over the course of 15 years a park in place that people didn't even know existed. Now there are blue heron landing in the middle of a city and kids in the neighborhood lining up, thanks to this great environmental group, and taking canoe rides on a river that was full of dead bodies, leaves, and shopping carts 15 years ago. And the United States Department, USDA, just actually put an urban fish ladder. I learned a lot about fish ladders in the last 20 years. I didn't know a lot. Right in it's the first one they put it in urban environments. So it was so many different elements, and it goes back to this complexity theory that you can't just work on the housing, you can't just work on jobs, you can't just work on better schools or healthcare or transit. All of those things actually have to happen at the same time.
I think that's why grassroots is so necessary for any sort of revitalization, because it is such a complex thing. Only something as complex as community can really address it all simultaneously. I want to push back a little bit on the New York thing, because New York is not a separate case. I mean, when New York in the 60s and 70s, I walk around neighborhoods now that people say, Union Square, this was a heroin exchange in the 60s and 70s, and Andy Warhol put his factory there because it was such cheap rent. Brendan was telling me that Holyoke in the 1920s had the highest concentration of millionaires of any city in the US. By the 1970s, it had the highest concentration of arson of any city in the US. So cities have these cycles that go up and down. New York, the neighborhood that I live in Brooklyn, I was talking to somebody who a little bit older than I was, who grew up there. She said Smith Street, which is right, residential neighborhood or shopping neighborhood right near me. She said you would want to duck your head for cover when you're driving down that street. And there were, garbage can fires that nobody was putting out, and every building was shuttered. And today it's like, restaurants that you couldn't even afford to eat in. I think that every city has a cycle, and it's weirdly, like paradoxically, being down at the bottom sets you up to come back if you do it the right way, because you've got cheap rent, you've got beautiful housing stock and building stock to take advantage of.
It's just that, I love New York, and I can, but it has a different type of economy and a different density. I think in this country in general, we have 50 years of very dumb growth patterns. I'm going to be quite honest, and we have, poor neighborhood design and central city disinvestment, and that happened over 50 years. And so a place like Holyoke has experienced that. But now we want, we're talking more about green and livability and walkability and bike paths and how do you access that. And I think Holyoke has every opportunity. I haven't been in Holyoke in about 20 years, and now this is my 3rd trip in 6 months. And I think the opportunities exist in trying to make that happen. One of the things that we're doing at HUD is Sustainable Communities Grants, which is trying to get different cities and towns to plan together. So one is right along the, here in the Connecticut River from Hartford up to almost the Vermont border, and Holyoke is in the middle of that, and the opportunities to come together. On the other hand, as I was saying earlier at lunch, Holyoke has a 5-acre site downtown with public housing built in 1939. I mean, New England has that type of challenge that is different, and yet we also have the density that I think could bring back. And the city, I think, is really doing a great job in looking at that site, because clearly they need to demolish that housing, but what do you put back? And they're talking about mixed use. We still need to maintain affordable housing for our residents, but there's the opportunity, hopefully, to have ground floor retail on that site, and to connect some of that site's use not to housing, maybe to move some of the housing to other locations around the city, but to still have some there right on site, because otherwise you could get, I mean, unfortunately in New York you have very low-end and very high-end opportunities now, and the challenge in New York City particularly has been to maintain that middle income, and I do think that is a challenge we see in some of our cities, and poverty being pushed to the inner ring suburbs, and that will probably be what my children are sitting here talking about in 20 years or, or 30 years. So.
Yeah, and on a comparative scale, I think the earlier panel was mentioning how Holyoke could be compared to East Cambridge, or what East Cambridge used to be, and look at Lechmere, and look at what Cambridge is now. And I think, okay, well, I will say I'm living in Cambridge right now, and I love it. And I think it's a great example of an industrial city that, it used to be meat packing, it used to be candy factories, it used to be furniture making, it used to be all these really dirty industrial places and buildings. And I think one of the main reasons why it was able to kind of pull itself together and pull itself out of depending on that industry was, well, first of all, there were transit lines that were placed. The Red Line was really, really important in connecting Cambridge to Boston. Also, the Longfellow Bridge was also extremely important. Those lines of communication, I mean, I think it made the distance from Cambridge to Boston, instead of 8 miles, it shortened to 3 miles, which was incredible. And then another thing was the entire influx of immigrants coming from, across the ocean. And unlike what happened in Boston, which was a lot of the immigrant communities kind of coalesced and formed these nodes in very isolated communities like the North End and Chinatown and all these different places. What happened in Cambridge was it was much more of a mixed, diverse kind of grouping of communities that came about, and I think that also fostered a lot of richness.
And I think the transit is really key, and I
Yes.
think having community engagement around that
Exactly.
is really important, and there are attempts now to connect the Fairmount line, which runs through the poorest neighborhoods of Boston, and there is a very, very concerted grassroots effort to engage them. But the transit, and that also requires at the federal level, where I'm working now, to break down those silos so that DOT isn't putting in a transit line, and we're talking about putting the housing,
Definitely.
Here's
2
what I'm
miles away.
hearing a couple words come up that are interesting, that they're related. So Barbara, you talked about density. You threw out the word density a couple times. I think you mentioned density. You mentioned nodes. You mentioned bridges to Boston playing a real role for Cambridge. And this all kind of points to like critical mass and being part of a network, and not being this isolated, scattered body, but getting something together enough that it hits critical mass and you start achieving something. What role does that play, and how do you get critical mass? Don.
Arts and culture.
Well, yeah, I
To a
mean,
degree.
arts and culture, certainly. Culture in general. I mean, we're all here in this wonderful space, which was an empty space and needed refurbishment. We're all people, I think, who share an interest in seeing everything get better, the world get better, where we live get better. And that is a cultural issue. America is, although it may not seem that way, America is still the richest country in the world. There's tremendous residual wealth in this country. And with that wealth, and I don't mean just in the hands of 1% of the country, but the wealth creates a need, an ambition for making things better, and a desire to find out how things can be better, whether it's in improving the transportation that we want to take, improving the housing stock, improving what people can do at night. I mean, arts and culture, I mean, I was shocked on the Victory Project that actually the Massachusetts Housing and Industrial Corporation did a study and found that performing arts centers and theaters are the #1 stimulators of downtown revitalization. Well, anybody who's in the arts knows how risky and scary it is. You know, some nights there are 3 people there, and sometimes there are no people there, and sometimes there are 3,000 people. It seems hard that interesting that a very hard-nosed organization would actually find that those statistics actually are generative. And I think that's very exciting. And I think it's exciting that we're sitting here and talking about this. And that's where the energy comes from. I mean, that's the grassroots that we can be, both globally and locally. And
as a counterpoint, I do think a part of the density, too, are some public decisions. And public government is putting in infrastructure. So as you mentioned, you know, the red line or the green line in Boston, or, you know, investing in an airport and not thinking about where are you going to put housing there, and trying to figure out how do we leverage off of each other because those decisions actually have a huge impact on the ground and create a certain level of, well, it does help promote density and putting things together in those different pieces. And I think that the public sector is still making those major investments. So where are they doing it? How are they doing it? Are they doing it smarter? Are they cooperating? Are they cleaning up a brownfield site? And then what's going on that site? I mean, I definitely remember Leechmere in those days. The state played a role in helping those professors at MIT and Harvard who were spinning off great ideas to keep their businesses in Boston, in Cambridge, and providing seed funding. So I think innovation funding also had an impact on what happened in Cambridge as well. And now we're talking about extending the line up through Somerville. What are we doing to think about the land use along those transit lines? Because that's where people will be drawn to.
It's interesting, just a case study of what you two are talking about, how arts and also planning. The neighborhood of Dumbo in Brooklyn, when I first moved there, was practically deserted. And it wasn't like a poor neighborhood, it was just deserted. There was nobody there. And a friend of mine who works in planning said, oh, this neighborhood in 10 years is going to be huge. It's going to be just the biggest neighborhood. I said, how do you know? He said, because they're zoning it for artists to move in. And he said, the city knows that whenever you zone something for artists to move in, the artists move in, and then the artists need cafes, so cafes open up. And the cafes make it safe for small businesses to open up. The small businesses make it safe for the lawyers to move in. And sure enough, it's happened, and it started with the arts. You know, it started, and it's still a very big arts community. That was the kind of the locus, the point that built that critical mass. And it took planning to kind of make that happen.
I mean, I think the one big thing to density and to building our cities, and the nut that I have yet to figure out, the best thing that I can do for it, is our school system. And our school systems are in ruins across the country, in our urban areas and in general. And we have to look at the pockets of innovation and creativity there, and what are we going to do to support them? Because that keeps people in the cities and keeps people, I think, in denser areas too. And I'm constantly puzzled because it's not my area of expertise. There may be others in the room with better ideas around that, but I think it's a big issue.
Let's bring it back to the grassroots question for a second, and let's imagine that we are living in a city in northeastern United States that had just had Cisco open a gigantic plant in it, that, you know, to the tune of how much, $100 million or $1 billion or something. What would be some grassroots things that you think would be effective city revitalizers that like individual people could do, not that needed to piggyback on anything, but that individuals could do?
So I think that's a very interesting scenario and very relevant at the moment. I want to tie that a little bit back to your question about critical mass, because I think right now there is a critical mass building around this desire and passion for entrepreneurship. And it's not something like, you know, later down on the line I want to have my own company and build a business, you know, like 20 years after I graduate. It's kind of this critical mass of students who are graduating now who all want to start a business. They all want to be in startups. And I have a ton of friends who are, you know, they were like courting the idea of working at Google or Apple, you know, any of these huge companies. And they turned down Google to go work at Dropbox, or turned down Apple to go work at, you know, the latest chat client or something. Just so, it just seems like the opposite of exactly what your parents would tell you. You know, you don't want to go and have this secure, you know, your 401k, you don't, I mean, that's just like not that important to a lot of people who are just graduating. I think there's this critical mass of young folks wanting to be in the startup community, and it's so great to see that happening here right now, actually. And I think the problem will not be with the grassroots and Cisco, it'll be with Cisco and trying to recruit new recruits.
So as a grassroots person in a city like Holyoke, you would start a startup, or would you, what would, an individual, like what?
I think I would try to do my own startup and then try to get all my friends to do a startup and then try to get all my other friends to do a startup and just have this kind of, network effect of valuing culture and like quality of life in your workspace more than, working for the man.
I mean, I think there's something important about, it seems to me, observing the process, that number one, business is about business. I mean, it's going to care about making its money. And that's always been the case, and that's part of the system that we live with. In a community where there needs to be more business has to be attracted. The Cisco system, or in the case of the computer center, which is coming to Holyoke, which is being built now, which is a wonderful project. It's one piece of what the mayor's office does and what the legislative delegation does to make happen. That business is coming here because it can get what it needs here at a very good price. And that's good. We have to also get every other kind of arts as a business, people's lifestyle as a business. We need to make that as available to people who want to come here to fill in, shall we say, the liveliness part. So we have lots of wonderful buildings here. The more a company like Cisco comes and spreads the word, that's great. But we also have to spread the word ourselves, and we have to see that, as does our political system, sees that as all part of the pieces that need to come to a community. I remember, when you talk about Dumbo, absolutely, people said that would be the next. The Brooklyn Academy of Music was being used as a basketball court in 1972. I mean, it's unimaginable. And, so what made those things happen? What made it happen is a synergy of people's lifestyle desire, their care for the other people in the community, and this issue of public housing, and that bothers me a lot. I mean, bothers me about the fate of it in our contemporary world, because we're fighting in many of these issues. We're fighting what I think is the last gasp of a very conservative grip on a vision of living. We're seeing, though, among the people who are really alive, that is being thrown aside. There are no longer the same sexual mores, no longer the same kinds of restraints that some of the attitude towards public housing or public education. We're being caught in a vestigial dialogue about that, which is irrelevant. Education should be great, and it should be available to everybody. And that also affects a community. It affects a community like Holyoke very strongly. So we can see the housing project right through the windows. I'm looking at it. And when that was built, that represented a solution for people who were having problems. And we've got to keep looking at that same problem. That problem isn't going to go away. I mean, it's not going to go away. It has to be improved on. And combined with everything else that makes a community function.
I think also figuring out the solutions is a job generator.
Yeah.
What to do with these sites, how to build housing, how to build space for schools and jobs and places. I mean, and for businesses, it's all about creating jobs at some point. But I think it also comes back to something that Tiffany said. I think this interesting contrast between Boston having the nodes of the different immigrant groups and Cambridge sort of being a little bit more of sort of integrated across groups, for lack of better words. Immigrants, the largest growing sector of our population in this country. So, and Holyoke is rich with that. How do we take advantage of that asset? that asset-based opportunity here to have these community, and you have sort of the first generation that comes, and then the second generation, and then they start to become more engaged, and the kids are in the school, and they learn English, and they get more involved. How do we keep them? How do we attract them? What do we do to support them and engage them to create a really vibrant, authentic place? And I think a place like Holyoke, your hypothetical city, whatever, it has that opportunity, because this doesn't look like anywhere USA. You know, and New England in general, I think, has that. And for me now, working for a federal agency, it's really hard when I'm sitting talking to my colleagues who represent North and South Dakota and Montana. They don't quite look on the ground like Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. It's really different here, and yay for us who get to live here. But we also have those challenges of these large monstrosities of buildings that should be looked at as large assets, and what are we going to do, and what are we going to do to take advantage? And I think tapping into that immigrant community is a huge part of it. The other fastest growing part of our community is empty nesters. And they seem to like cities and culture and have a little more excess capital, and they're going to be coming to your theater. And
So this has been a question
Hopefully.
that's been going on for years. Like I said, you know, like all cities go on these cycles, and Brooklyn is up and then is down, and Holyoke was up and then is down, and it's what does technology bring? How does that change the game? How does this new culture of entrepreneurship, of starting instead of joining, change the game? And how does that relate to cities revitalizing themselves?
I think it has to do with, well, I think a lot of it's seated within the educational institutions. Having 100,000 plus students here is an incredible asset. I wasn't even aware there were 100,000 students in this area. That's really incredible. And I'm going to also nod at the question that you had before about what can one person do. And I'm going to give an example of my friend Michael Greenwich, who was at MIT, and he dropped out recently to do MIT Startup Boot Camp, which was this one-day event that happened about a month ago. And it started off 3 years ago, and he basically got a bunch of people he knew who had started companies, big, small companies. It didn't really matter what kind of company. They wanted to start a company, and he came and brought them to an auditorium where they spoke for free, and they educated, you know, the younger classes on what it meant to start and own a company. And it started off, you know, with maybe 500, 600 people the first year. And this past year, he had 3,000 people come. And it's just a one-day event. It's completely free. There's coffee in the morning. And that's basically it. And he fostered this, he single-handedly fostered this community of kids who are interested in entrepreneurship. And it was very educational institution word of mouth. You know, in college, you do things because your friends are also doing them and they're cool and you want to do stuff with them. So I think tapping into that will be instrumental for Hollywood.
I think a really key thing that I take away from that story is that he just showed up day after day and did it, and it builds slowly. And I think of the Woody Allen quote of half of life is just showing up in the morning.
Exactly.
And you know, when I started DIY City, it just started off me posting to this site, posting my thoughts, and then one other person started posting, then more people, and pretty soon the thing was just going on its own. And that's so much of any sort of getting takeoff in any sort of situation is just showing up and doing it again and inviting other people and getting it going, getting
Yeah,
lift.
and we recently, at the event, we got a tweet from Bruce Nussbaum of Business Week, and he was like, oh, wow, I really want to host a startup boot camp for designers at Parsons. And it was like, oh, that totally makes sense. Why don't we just go and do that? So it's just kind of this chain of events that is facilitated by social media and technology and all of these things that could have like a really great impact.
I was hoping we could open up to the audience to hear from them too, because I think on that end it is so helpful and so productive and so creative. The double-edged swordness, because I believe in that with the technology, is as, particularly in government, as you begin to implement projects, that social media could be used in an instant to get the opposition out too. So it is really, really scary at times, because you know, and we see it with the Tea Party in this country, and I don't know, maybe there's lots of Tea Party members here, but I doubt it. But sort of, like, you know, social media can be used for the opposition as well, and public projects often require the leadership of an elected official to say, you know, we're going to take the resources and we're going to put it into this building here at the Idea Mill. And you can garner the support, but the opposition can come out just as quickly too. So it's just a cautionary note, because I think in general what you're saying, these spontaneous you know, meetups that grow into something even more, and 3,000 people, that's just incredible. It just shows the interest, and that's the upside.
We have a few minutes more, Brendan just told me. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions for panel members or comments or anything to add. Go ahead.
I'm an adult educator at Holyoke, and my question is, what is the relationship in some of these urban environments that are attempting to revitalize? What is the relationship to adult education? And not necessarily on the college level, but teaching folks English, getting them GEDs, and really fostering education in all of the community, and not just, you know, the higher education, higher skill level.
The question.
You want me to jump in?
I was asked to repeat the question at the end of the question, so let me try.
But you weren't listening to the question because you had to be told.
For the following two questions,
Go to the mics.
use the
Sorry.
microphone.
Yep.
Just
The question was, what role does adult education play in revitalizing cities? To be succinct. All right? Okay.
I mean, I can jump in. I know that a lot of adult education is done through grassroots nonprofit groups and their ability to reach out and connect to folks. But I think there are some very good innovations. One organization in Providence, again, where I know, is Building Futures, which was an outgrowth of Youth Build. Some people may know Youth Build was trying to get young people some job skills in the construction trades, but not necessarily jobs in that area, so they were trying to get them jobs. This Building Futures was more for adults to actually not only get them the skills, but to actually find them jobs and place them. And one of the things was helping them get their GED, because they thought in the long run that would work. And I thought this was really innovative. They found out that a GED doesn't really work in this marketplace anymore that we have in this country. So they actually were working with the local schools to actually get people their high school diplomas, because the GED was sort of seen as second rate. So I think it really starts from a very creative, innovative idea that links to another innovative idea. And this was, again, a jobs training program linking to our local school system and trying to figure out a way to creatively address that issue. And I think that is going to be great for the community in Providence, for the low-income community of adults who are really trying to find a way to link their jobs, their skills to the jobs that are in this country, because we have a huge immigrant community too, and many people come here with a lot of skills, but it's not translatable if they don't speak the language or have the qualifications necessary to practice their trade in this country.
Mike's not on back there.
I thought since I walked up here,
It's
I
not on.
could be
His mic's not on over there.
oh, the mic's.
Yeah,
Mike's not on. Yeah.
I came to the mic.
But it didn't come to you.
Got to find a
Hello?
switch.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Great. Thank you. All right, so since I hauled up here, now I really have an important question for you. What, in any of the urban revitalization efforts, is the role of foundations or philanthropic sort of mission-related investing that you saw as a success, and foundations and corporate funders as potential partners and investors in revitalization?
Well, corporations and foundations, I think, are obviously absolutely essential. They respond to people's needs. And so that's why it comes back to the theme of this panel. If people don't bring projects or bring their desire to see something happen to those structures, it doesn't happen. They will not. I mean, some corporations and foundations, more foundations, are responsive and come looking a little bit, but in general, the grassroots, people have to go to them with projects. And the adult learning here in Holyoke, there's an adult, I don't know if you were involved with that opened at the Transportation Center right up on Veterans Park. And as a person who comes into Holyoke pretty much every day, just the change that has made as one of the constituents of that transportation center with Holyoke Community College, I mean, to me, that brings all kinds of people and their aspirations together into a place that people, you just seeing people going in and coming out, and and really one has to credit Holyoke Community College, the mayor's office, the Office of Economic Development in the city have worked very hard to make emblematic, and not only emblematic, but real things like that happen. So in a way, that's a function. I mean, foundations will support that if the city and people say they want it, and corporations will support it. And I think it's very key. It's very hard for anything that needs financing to take place without that boost.
Well, I think this is the first time in 20 years that I'm not raising money for a living, so it's an interesting question, so thank you for asking it. Foundations are conveners, and they can really convene and bring people together, and then they can actually provide the seed money for out-of-the-box thinking and creative thinking. And you need the foundations to put that seed money in, because there's nowhere else that the nonprofit sector is going to get that money. Because you can't go to a venture capitalist and say, we're going to get people their diplomas instead of their GEDs. So foundations are absolutely critical. And it's sort of interesting to me. I came to HUD, and among the 5 fire hoses that they've been shooting at me here in my early days, I noticed that of all the federal agencies, HUD is taking a lead in trying to bring the philanthropies together with federal government. So I'll be curious to see where that goes. But at the local level, can't do it. Foundations are absolutely critical to supporting the arts, to supporting out-of-the-box thinking and creativity, and you've got the bully pulpit of being a convener. So if you work for a foundation, go for it and really set aside some of your money. You said something about program-related investments, and I know that I came from an organization that was one of the champions of that, of taking low-cost money and loaning it out again with a small amount of money put on top of it. And I think that in this country, we need to have a discussion, I really have to say this, in which foundations start to spend some of their principal. If you're waiting, that's a rainy day fund, it ain't getting any rainier than 2011, 2012, 2013. So we got to dip into principal and get that money out there and try some things that aren't exactly mainstream. And don't be going saying this is something that HUD said, please. It's just from my years, and I can say it now because I'm not raising money, but MacArthur Foundation has led the way in saying that they were going to spend a greater percent of their asset base. And they're, we all bow down and pray to the MacArthur building when we're in Chicago and kiss the sidewalk there. But they're thinking outside the box. They're thinking creatively. And the thing about MacArthur that was so interesting in my 20 years at LISC was they were willing at times to even admit they were wrong and change course, which was really refreshing and terrific. But it sets the trend for other. And here it's really small community foundations, family foundations, the arts, social services, community development, environmental issues. Foundations are leading the way.
And I think we're out of time.
Sorry.
So great. Thank you.